The heavy silence in the White House was broken only by the slow tick of a clock above the fireplace. Seated across from Donald Trump, President Ibrahim Traore held a crisp, cream-colored document in his hands. His jaw was tight, his eyes unwavering. Trump leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "You will sign it now." Around them, top U.S. officials stood like stone pillars, military generals, business elites, and senior diplomats, all waiting to see if this young African president would fold under pressure. The document laid before Traoré wasn't just any deal. It was a trap, an agreement that would hand over control of Burkina Faso's most valuable resources, grant U.S. forces sweeping rights, and silence any attempt at resistance. "You came all the way to America to play games?" Trump said, tapping the table. "Let me make this clear, there will be no renegotiations. Sign, or face the consequences." President Traoré glanced down at the fine print, his face unreadable. The words swirled like smoke: mineral control, airspace rights, veto power over national security decisions, immediate and irreversible. It wasn't a partnership, it was a leash. For a moment, Traoré said nothing. Then slowly, with the eyes of the world on him, he picked up the pen and signed. A flick of ink, a sharp breath. And with that stroke, the leader of one of Africa's proudest nations was humiliated in front of the global stage. Or so it seemed. What no one in that room realized was that President Ibrahim Traoré had already begun preparing his revenge. And when it came, it would shake the very foundations of power, not just in Washington but across the world. But how did it come to this? What drove the fearless Burkinabe leader to that room in the first place? And what plan was already in motion, quietly growing beneath the surface of diplomacy and domination? Let's go back, before the pen, before the trap, to where this story truly begins, in the quiet tension of a morning in Ouagadougou, where an envelope changed the fate of two nations. It was a beautiful morning in Burkina Faso. The sun bathed the capital city in gold, casting long shadows across the presidential palace. Birds chirped outside as if unaware that the country stood on the edge of something dangerous. Inside, President Ibrahim Traoré walked the halls with steady purpose. Dressed in his usual military uniform, he paused when a young aide handed him a sealed letter. The seal of the United States gleamed under the light. The note was short, but the tone unmistakable. "Mr. Traoré, you are required to come to the United States for a private meeting of great importance. Your presence is personally requested by me, Donald J. Trump." The word that burned in his mind: required. He read it again. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And that, more than anything else, stirred something deep in him, a fire that had long been burning. He called his top advisors immediately. Within minutes, the crisis room was filled with generals, diplomats, and intelligence officials. The letter was laid bare on the table for everyone to see. One advisor said cautiously, "Mr. President, this could be an opportunity. A direct talk could open doors, even if it's tense." Another shook his head. "This is not diplomacy. It's command. The tone alone is disrespectful." Traoré listened in silence. Then he stood, paced the room, and said firmly, "We don't reject invitations from powerful nations without thinking. But we don't obey disguised commands either." He needed time to think. But the letter, it had already started a firestorm behind closed doors. Pressure was mounting. Western allies froze aid. American-backed media began to attack Traoré's image. Headlines labeled him a rebel, a populist, a danger. And yet, in the streets of Burkina Faso, a different voice was rising. Young people shouted, "We stand with the captain." Social media lit up. A movement was forming, not just around a man, but around an idea: Africa deserves respect. Back in his office, Traoré took his time. He stared out at the flag waving in the wind, knowing this wasn't just about him. It was about legacy, identity, freedom. And so, his response was crafted not in anger, but with precision. A future meeting may be considered at a later date, depending on national emergencies. The reply was respectful, but it was a message. Burkina Faso would not come running. But this reply sparked something far more dangerous than political gossip. Within 48 hours, the backlash came crashing like a wave. Trump, speaking from his Mar-a-Lago estate, snarled into a camera, Some leaders think they're bigger than they are. Ignoring America doesn't make you strong, it makes you isolated and weak. The video went viral. Traoré watched in silence. That night, he didn't sleep. He thought of the children in villages with no water, of mothers burying sons after raids, of young men choosing dignity over desperation. He couldn't abandon them for photo ops and power games. But he also couldn't ignore the looming threat. Something told him that this confrontation was just beginning. The next morning, a new letter arrived from Trump. And this time, it wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Effective immediately, all Burkinabe citizens are banned from entering the United States. No visas. No exceptions. A full-blown diplomatic shutdown. Markets buzzed with fear. Students cried as scholarships were frozen. Business owners panicked. Families were torn apart. One video from a young Burkinabe went viral. Trump thinks we need him. Let him keep his country. Our dignity isn't for sale. Still, beneath the noise, a question lingered in the minds of many. What will Traoré do now? And so, in a press conference that felt more like a declaration of war, President Traoré stood before the world and said, "If Trump closes his doors, let him keep them closed. We will build our own. Because real strength comes from within." It was the speech that ignited a fire across Africa. But it also pushed Trump into full attack mode. He wanted revenge. He wanted compliance. And above all, he wanted the young African leader to kneel. So when Traoré finally agreed to a meeting in Washington, many thought it was over, that he had given in, that he would break. But they didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that this wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was the setup to something no one would see coming. And when the pen hit that paper in the White House, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Two black SUVs rolled quietly through the gates of the White House, their windows tinted, their flags small but unmistakable. Burkina Faso had arrived. President Ibrahim Traore stepped out, flanked by his top security officers, dressed not in a business suit but in his military uniform. He stood straight, eyes scanning the grand architecture that symbolized centuries of American power. The air was cold, unusually so for a spring morning in D.C. But it wasn't the weather that chilled the moment, it was the silence. There were no reporters allowed at this arrival. No welcoming committee. No flags waving side by side. Only the distant click of cameras trying to catch something, anything. Inside, the meeting room had been arranged with exacting detail. The American flag dominated the decor. Traoré was ushered in alone. No advisors, no aides. Trump was already seated, fingers steepled, eyes watching. "You're finally here," Trump said, voice flat. Traoré nodded once. "I came for my people." Trump leaned back. "Good. Let's not waste time. We have a contract ready. It's in your best interest to sign it." An aide placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward Traoré. The captain opened it. He read every line. And his heart sank. The document, dressed in formal language and polished promises, was a death sentence for national sovereignty. The United States would gain exclusive rights to Burkina Faso's air transport revenues. America would mine and export gold, manganese, and other rare minerals at preset, non-negotiable rates. U.S. bases could be built anywhere, and any Burkinabe law conflicting with U.S. interests could be temporarily suspended. Then the final clause. This agreement must be signed immediately, without counsel or external review. Traoré looked up. "Mr. President, this is not a cooperation. It's a takeover." Trump smirked. "It's a deal. And you're lucky to be offered one. Sign it now, or everything you value will be crushed. Aid, investment, military support, gone. Your name will be remembered not as a patriot, but a fool." A long silence. Then, the unthinkable happened. Traoré signed. His pen scratched the final page with controlled motion. He closed the folder, pushed it toward Trump, and stood. The American president grinned wide and leaned back in his chair, victorious. "Smart move, Captain. You just saved your country." "No," Traoré interrupted, calm but cold. "I just bought time." Trump's smile faded. What does that mean? You'll find out soon enough. And with that, President Ibrahim Traore walked out of the room, his posture strong, eyes burning with quiet fury. He had signed, but what he hadn't done was surrender. The plane back to Ouagadougou was quiet. The team didn't speak much, unsure how to react. Had their leader just folded? Sold out? Betrayed his cause? But Traoré was deep in thought. What happened in Washington wasn't weakness. It was calculation. He knew that rejecting the deal on American soil would bring instant retaliation. Sanctions. Smear campaigns. Worse. But signing that document on their terms, that gave him access to the full details. It exposed the game. And it gave him a new kind of power, information. Back home, he called an emergency session of Parliament. The signed contract was presented, but not for ratification. Instead, it was examined, exposed, and broken down, live on national television. The people saw every clause, every betrayal hidden in plain sight. The story swept across the nation like wildfire. Then, in a speech aired across Africa, Traoré addressed his people. Yes, I signed, but not because I was defeated. I signed because I needed the world to see exactly what they tried to do to us. Now we know their terms. And now, we act on ours. He tore a copy of the contract in half, on camera. And the world watched in disbelief. Trump was enraged. Behind the scenes, pressure built. American officials tried to threaten legal action, economic retaliation, political destabilization. But Traoré was already ahead. Quietly, in the weeks following his trip, he had contacted allies across Africa, in Latin America, and parts of Asia. Nations that, like Burkina Faso, were tired of playing by rigged rules. A new bloc was forming. A resistance. One led by the captain who had folded, only to turn the entire game upside down. But the real turning point came weeks later, when a leaked audio clip surfaced. A recording from inside the White House meeting, secretly captured by one of Traoré's team. In it, Trump could be heard saying, "If he signs this, we own that country. It's just a matter of time. Africa needs to learn who's in charge." The clip exploded online. #WeAreNotOwned began trending worldwide. Even Americans were shocked. And suddenly, the narrative flipped. Traoré wasn't a sellout. He was a strategist. A master of long-game politics. He let the wolf into the light, and when the world saw its teeth, they chose to fight back. Back in Washington, things were spinning out of control. Trump's camp denied the tape, but the damage was done. Global trust wavered. International alliances cracked. And in Ouagadougou, the people celebrated. Their president had been humiliated, but only for a moment. Now, the revenge had begun. Before we continue, take a second. If this story pulled you in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Also, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Traoré's shoes? Have you ever seen someone turn a moment of humiliation into power? Let's talk about it below. It began slowly at first. A quiet shift in tone during news broadcasts. A few nervous editorials in international newspapers. Then, a sudden flurry of diplomatic visits to Ouagadougou, officials from France, China, Brazil, and even Canada arriving unexpectedly, trying to understand what was happening behind the scenes. What they saw shocked them. Burkina Faso wasn't backing down. It was rising. President Ibrahim Traore had mobilized a national task force, economists, legal scholars, military strategists, and tech experts. Their mission, to untangle the strings attached to every foreign investment, every aid package, every mining contract. Within weeks, Traoré delivered a second televised address. This time, he didn't speak just to his nation, but to the world. Burkina Faso will review all agreements signed with external powers in the last 20 years. Every clause, every loophole, every unfair deal. If it does not serve our people, it will be cancelled. The camera zoomed slightly closer as he said, "We were not born to be controlled. Our resources are not gifts to the world, they are blessings for our children. If you want access, you'll treat us as equals. No more signatures in secret. No more papers under pressure." Across Africa, Students cheered in universities. Journalists broadcasted the speech live in markets. Even distant villages with barely working radios played the audio again and again. And in Washington, Trump seethed. He hadn't just lost control of Traoré, he'd lost the narrative. This wasn't supposed to happen. What was supposed to be a calculated humiliation, a young African leader forced to sign under pressure, had turned into a global reckoning. The very idea that an African president could outmaneuver Trump on his own turf had become a symbol. A movement. A slap in the face to years of arrogance, paternalism, and hidden imperialism. So Trump responded the only way he knew how. He attacked. New headlines flooded the U.S. media. Burkina Faso faces terror crisis. Is Traoré losing control? Unstable populist leader threatens African peace. Leaked reports suggest ties between Traoré and extremist groups. But none of it stuck. Why? Because Traoré invited the press, all of it, to come to Burkina Faso. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, independent creators. Anyone with a camera and a platform. You want the truth? Come and see it. And they did. What they found was not chaos. It was construction. Schools being rebuilt. Roads finally paved. Women's cooperatives expanding. Youth programs growing in once-forgotten towns. But more than that, they found people proud. Not just proud of their leader, but proud of themselves. Of their stance. Their voice. Their unity. Then came the breaking point. A quiet email sent to the Burkinabe Minister of Energy. It was from a senior executive at an American mining corporation operating in Burkina Faso. The message was cold. If your government does not reverse its decision to review our contracts, we will be forced to withdraw all support, and you know what that means. Expect the mines to stop, jobs to vanish, and your economy to crash. Consider this your last warning. Traoré didn't flinch. He called a press conference the next morning, and for the first time, he shared the email, projected on a massive screen behind him. He pointed to it and said, "This is the real cost of dignity. This is what happens when you say no to greed." Then he announced the immediate nationalization of every American-owned mine in Burkina Faso. Gasps rippled through the audience. The move was bold, risky, dangerous, and it sent Trump into a fury. He called an emergency press briefing. "We gave him a deal. We offered him a seat at the table. And he spat in our faces. The United States will respond. We will protect our interests." One journalist dared to ask, "Mr. Trump, but wasn't that deal one-sided? Some are saying Traoré only signed it under pressure." Trump's face turned red. He turned away and walked off the stage. For the first time, he had no answer. Meanwhile, inside Burkina Faso, another wave of transformation had begun. Inspired by the movement, local artists started painting murals of Traoré with slogans like, "We signed nothing but our freedom. One signature. One storm. Honor is not for sale." Universities began offering classes on political strategy using the Traoré case. Students in Kenya, Ghana, and even parts of Europe cited him in their debates. The world had found a new kind of leader, not perfect, but principled. And the revenge? It wasn't just about Trump. It was bigger. It was about exposing the system that let people like Trump believe they could command other nations like pawns on a board. But not anymore. Not in this Africa. As Traoré's approval rating soared at home and admiration grew abroad, his security team detected something troubling, a spike in foreign intelligence activity inside Burkina Faso. Unmarked drones spotted in the sky. Anonymous calls warning of a final lesson being planned. And then, a leak from within his own team confirmed it. A plot was forming, not economic, not diplomatic, but personal. The same forces that had tried to use papers, deals, and media against him were now planning something far darker. They had failed to trap him with signatures. Now, they were considering elimination. Because one man with a voice had become more dangerous than any army. It started with a flicker on the security feed, just a blip. A drone, too small to be military issued, hovering just outside the presidential residence in Ouagadougou at 3:14 a.m. It disappeared before guards could intercept. 3 days later, Traoré's convoy was rerouted on short notice. An unmarked truck had been spotted abandoned along the original route, stuffed with military-grade explosives. The message was clear. The pen hadn't worked. The threats hadn't worked. Now, they wanted him gone. Inside the high-security war room of the presidential palace, Traoré stood before his top intelligence officers, staring at intercepted emails between foreign operatives and local collaborators. The plot had been forming for weeks. An assassination attempt, planned to look like an accident. But something about Traoré was different. He wasn't shaken. He wasn't panicking. He had expected this. He had read history. And he knew how every empire behaved when it lost control. Still, this time, it wasn't just political. This time, it was personal. One of the men named in the plot had once served beside him during his early military days. A brother in arms, now a hired mole. The betrayal stung, but not more than the truth it revealed. Even within his own walls, loyalty was a currency foreign powers were trying to buy. The captain made a choice. He would not hide. He would not run. And he would not fall. That same evening, he appeared live on national TV, his uniform crisp, his face calm, but his voice carrying fire. There are those who fear our independence so much, they would rather see me dead than see Burkina Faso free. They send drones, bombs, and betrayal. But I stand before you tonight to say, I will not be moved. I am not your puppet. I am your servant. And I will serve until my last breath. The country erupted in applause. In homes, in restaurants, on dusty roads where satellite TVs flickered in and out of signal. Across Africa, people whispered the same thing. He knows the risk, and still he stands. But as bold as his speech was, the danger was real. His security was doubled. His movements became unpredictable. Even his food had to be tested in triplicate. And yet, Traoré kept working. Because while foreign agents were trying to eliminate him, he was eliminating the system that allowed them power. Phase 2 of his revenge began quietly. Burkina Faso's government passed sweeping reforms to cut off all foreign military support that came with conditions. No more hidden bases. No more technical advisors with secret agendas. No more backdoor surveillance agreements. All foreign assets operating under suspicious or unverifiable terms were given 7 days to leave the country. The message was direct. Burkina Faso will fight its own battles. At the same time, Traoré launched a bold economic initiative, Project Baobab, designed to process and export gold, manganese, and other resources through African-owned companies, retaining value within the continent. He invited other African nations to join. Senegal responded first, then Mali, then the Central African Republic. A new economic bloc was born, modest at first, but powerful in symbolism. Africa was no longer just the source. It was becoming the center. But the real shock came 1 week later. In the middle of a stormy night, Traoré released a recorded message to be played on every national radio station at dawn. It was a reading of Trump's secret contract, every word, every clause, every hidden demand, read aloud, in full, in both French and local languages. Why? Because Traoré believed the people had the right to know exactly what he had been pressured to sign, and why he had chosen to expose it instead of obey. The reading lasted nearly 2 hours. And by sunrise, markets were on fire, not with anger at Traoré, but with love, with chants, with posters of his face covered in dust but raised high like a banner. Across social media, one line from the broadcast spread like lightning. A paper signed under threat is not a promise, it's a scar. Even in the United States, activists began to speak out. Former diplomats gave interviews saying, "This deal never should have been drafted. It's colonialism in fine print." The blowback stunned Trump's team. What had been intended as a silent coup of influence had become a global scandal. People were asking the question no one had dared before. Why does America still think it can control Africa? And then, just when the heat was at its peak, Traoré made one final, irreversible move. He signed a declaration, live on camera, that all natural resources previously contracted to American companies were now under full Burkinabe authority. Every ounce of gold, every shipment of minerals, every square foot of land. No more profits funneled out through shell companies. No more tax loopholes. No more quiet colonization. It was a move that would trigger economic war, but it was also the moment his revenge was complete. The man who had once been forced to sign in silence now held the pen of power. And he had flipped the entire script. But just when things seemed victorious, a storm gathered. Satellite surveillance revealed an unusual buildup of U.S. military assets near Allied borders. Trade routes began closing. Cyberattacks hit national infrastructure in what appeared to be coordinated digital strikes. The West wasn't finished. They weren't ready to let go. And Traoré, he wasn't done fighting either. Because the final confrontation was coming, not in the shadows, but face to face. The air over Ouagadougou was heavy, not with dust or heat, but with anticipation. After weeks of tension, after nationalizations, cyberattacks, threats, and failed plots, the final showdown was no longer political. It was personal. President Ibrahim Traore had done the unthinkable. He had outwitted one of the most powerful figures in global politics. He had exposed a secret contract meant to strip his country of its sovereignty. And he had turned humiliation into resistance, resistance into revolution. But Donald Trump wasn't done. From his high tower in New York, flanked by his inner circle and powerful backers, Trump issued a direct message to Burkina Faso, this time not through the media, not through back channels, but through an official communiqué delivered by a private U.S. envoy. The message was chilling in its simplicity. Rescind the nationalization order. Return U.S. corporate access. Reopen diplomatic channels. Or face the full weight of America. Traoré read it aloud to his cabinet, then burned the letter in front of them. His voice steady. They think threats make us smaller. But they forget, pressure makes coal into diamonds. And with that, Traoré issued his final decree. Burkina Faso was officially cutting all remaining diplomatic ties with the United States. Airspace closed. Borders sealed. Contracts voided. American businesses required to leave within 14 days or face government seizure. International media exploded. The move was unheard of. No African country had ever stood toe-to-toe with the United States in this way, not by war, but by sheer political will. Some called him reckless. Others called him a visionary. But no one could deny it. Traoré had changed the game. And just when it seemed the story had reached its peak, something no one saw coming happened. Trump responded. Personally. A surprise press conference was called at a Manhattan venue, filled with journalists from around the globe. Trump stood before the podium, his usual bravado dulled. The cameras flashed, the crowd hushed. He began, uncharacteristically measured. I've made a lot of deals in my time. Good ones. Big ones. The best. But sometimes, you run into someone who refuses the deal. Who doesn't fold. And whether you like them or not, you've got to respect that. There was a pause. Journalists leaned forward. Ibrahim Traore. He's not someone I agree with. But he made his choice. He stood his ground. He didn't break. That's rare. And then, just like that, Trump ended the conference and walked off. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't surrender. But it was something even more powerful, an admission of defeat. The world knew it. Traoré had won, not just politically, but symbolically. He had stepped into the lion's den, signed under threat, and turned that act into a fire that lit a continent. He had shown that even under pressure, you can outplay giants if you know your worth, if you move smart, and if you don't blink first. In the weeks that followed, the impact spread beyond borders. African leaders from across the continent began reviewing long-standing agreements. Young people in Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, and beyond rallied under slogans like, "If Burkina Faso can say no, so can we." Traoré toured regional capitals, not as a celebrity, but as a builder. He spoke of cooperation, not rebellion, of dignity, not defiance. And his message was always the same. We are not anti-America. We are pro-Africa. We are not enemies of the world. We are partners to those who treat us as equals. Even African diasporas in the U.S. began holding town halls and writing op-eds titled, "Why Traoré Matters." His story sparked something deeper than headlines. It sparked hope. But back in Ouagadougou, Traoré remained grounded. He visited the same neighborhoods where he had once stood in uniform as a soldier. He sat with the same mothers who had once cried for peace. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, economically, politically, even personally. The cost of dignity wasn't cheap, but the reward, it was freedom. And no price was too high for that. In the final chapter of his memoirs, published years later, Traoré wrote, "They forced me to sign a paper. They tried to humiliate me. But they didn't understand. Humiliation only works on those who believe they are less. I never believed I was less. And I never will." So what would you have done in his place? Signed under pressure? Walked away and risked everything? Tell us in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or even made you think twice, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to believe that standing tall is always worth it, even when the whole world is watching. This was the story of President Ibrahim Traore. Not the man who folded, not the man who ran, but the man who signed, and still won.